After World War II ended, the world watched Nazi doctors stand trial at Nuremberg. They were convicted. Many were executed. At the same time, on the other side of the world, another group of men had done far worse. They had infected prisoners with plague, with cholera, with frostbite, deliberately. They had conducted live vivisections, surgery on conscious human beings, to study how organs functioned in real time. They had pressurized people in chambers until their eyes left their skulls. They had frozen prisoners alive and documented how long it took. They killed an estimated 3,000 people inside a single facility. Conservative estimates put the total death toll across their program at 200,000. Not one of them stood trial. Not one served a single day in prison. Instead, they were quietly flown to the United States, given new identities in some cases, consulting contracts in others, and absorbed into American biological weapons research. The deal was simple. America got the data. Japan's scientists got immunity. The victims got nothing. Not even acknowledgement for another 5 decades. This is Unit 731, and this is the agreement that buried it. Pingfong, on the outskirts of Harbin, was not a hidden bunker or a single laboratory. It was a military-industrial campus sprawling across 6 square kilometers, ringed with fences and guard towers, its cover story stamped on every official document, the Epidemic Prevention and Water Purification Department of the Kwantung Army. The blueprints, preserved in Japanese and Soviet archives, show more than 150 buildings. Laboratories, animal houses, incinerators, barracks, power plants, crematoria, and a prison block at the heart. At its peak, Unit 731 employed roughly 3,000 staff, including army doctors, microbiologists, engineers, and a rotating garrison of military police. Each role was cataloged in meticulous personnel ledgers, down to the last cook and typist. 4 main staff categories divided the work: scientific, technical, administrative, and security. The organization was vast, efficient, and deliberate. The prisoners, stripped of names and status, were recorded in the files as maruta, which meant logs. This was not slang from the ranks. It was the official term in lab notebooks, experiment logs, and internal orders. The word erased identity and made systematic murder a matter of routine paperwork. Human beings were processed, counted, and disposed of as raw material. Every experiment, every death was measured and filed. The bureaucracy of killing was itself a weapon, and the records it produced would become the currency of immunity when the war ended. In Pingfong, the scale of cruelty was matched only by the precision with which it was organized. The core of Unit 731's work was a catalog of experiments as methodical as it was merciless. Every procedure, every death, was entered into laboratory notebooks and surgical reports, preserved for later study, not to remember the victims, but to refine the science of killing. 5 main lines of research ran through these records. First, plague and cholera infection studies. Prisoners were injected or exposed to Yersinia pestis and Vibrio cholerae, their symptoms charted, their deaths timed to the hour. Second, frostbite and hypothermia trials overseen by physiologist Yoshimura Hisato, who recorded the precise moment flesh froze and blood stopped moving, sometimes after hours in sub-zero chambers. Third, pressure chamber experiments subjected captives to rapid changes in atmospheric pressure, watching for the point where lungs ruptured or consciousness failed. Fourth, vivisection without anesthesia. Organs removed from living bodies to document disease progression before death. Fifth, open field tests. Men, women, and children tied to stakes as bombs laced with plague or cholera detonated nearby, the spread of infection measured and logged. Each experiment was planned, executed, and recorded with bureaucratic care. The scientists were not nameless monsters. They were functionaries, their signatures on every page, their calculations as cold as the steel tables on which their subjects died. These files, kept in locked cabinets and later smuggled out of Pingfong, would become the bargaining chips of immunity. The data's value lay in its precision, its scale, and its utter disregard for human life. August 1945. The Soviet Red Army was closing in on Harbin, and the walls of Pingfong were about to fall. In those final days, General Shiro Ishii did not hesitate. He issued a direct command: destroy every record, every instrument, every trace that could reveal the scale of what had happened inside Unit 731. The order was brutal and explicit. Kill all remaining prisoners, burn all files, leave nothing for the enemy. Staff who hesitated faced threats of execution themselves. The incinerators ran night and day, devouring experiment logs, pathology slides, and the names of thousands who had been reduced to maruta, logs not people, in official records. But not everything vanished in the flames. Shiro Ishii and his closest officers kept back the most valuable files, the data, decades of laboratory notebooks, statistical tables, and biological samples. These documents were not just evidence of mass murder. They were bargaining chips. Soviet occupation reports later described the scene: smoldering ruins, scattered ash, and a handful of hidden safes that had already been emptied by Ishii's men. The destruction was not a panicked retreat. It was a calculated purge, designed to erase the victims and preserve only what would be useful for negotiation. The files that survived would soon become the currency of immunity, traded for protection at the highest levels. The lives lost were consigned to smoke, but the data remained intact, organized, and ready to be bartered. In the first weeks after Japan's surrender, the files smuggled out of Pingfang were already currency. Lieutenant Colonel Murray Sanders, a U.S. Army bacteriologist, arrived in Tokyo in September 1945 with orders from the highest levels to secure Japan's biological warfare data. Sanders met with Shiro Ishii under the pretense of scientific exchange. Ishii did not come empty-handed. He laid out glass slides, autopsy photographs, and handwritten experiment logs, proof of human trials, not theory. The Americans knew exactly what they were being offered: case histories, infection curves, mortality charts, all mapped onto the bodies of the Maruta, the erased. In a classified memo, Sanders reported that the material was impossible to obtain in the USA because of scruples attached to human experimentation. The language was cold, the calculation clear. The files were not evidence for a courtroom. They were a prize for the victors, and the price was impunity. Within weeks, Sanders recommended a formal deal: full immunity for Ishii and his staff in exchange for the complete archive. The negotiation was not a secret among subordinates. Internal cables from MacArthur's headquarters, preserved in occupation policy files, record the decision to shield the entire 731 network from prosecution. On September 12, 1945, MacArthur's office issued a directive to the Surgeon General: secure all research data and ensure no legal action is taken against Dr. Ishii, Colonel Ota, and associated personnel. The agreement was finalized in March 1948 with a blanket order: all persons who have provided the occupation forces with scientific material derived from the former Japanese biological warfare program shall receive complete immunity from prosecution for war crimes. This was not the result of confusion or ignorance. It was a deliberate, documented bargain. Every signature, every memo, every directive an admission that the United States knew the cost and chose to pay it. The files changed hands. The perpetrators walked free. The victims remained uncounted, unnamed, and uncompensated. Subscribe for more untold truths. Shiro Ishii, the architect of Unit 731, died quietly in 1959, never once summoned to court, never forced to answer for a single death. He lived out his days in Tokyo, his government pension intact, his expertise courted by Japan's Ministry of Health. Across post-war Japan, former Unit 731 doctors published research, taught at universities, and took up senior roles in pharmaceutical firms. Masaji Kitano, once chief of the Pingfang laboratory, became a professor and later led a major health research institute. Others joined the Self-Defense Forces Medical Corps or entered politics, their wartime records sanitized and sealed. Not one faced prosecution or public disgrace. The files that had cataloged death in Pingfang now secured careers, not convictions. For decades, their names appeared in scientific journals and government rosters, untouched by any official reckoning. The silence was not an accident, it was policy. The victims, erased as logs, remained lost to history, while the men who ordered and recorded their deaths built comfortable public lives. For decades, the truth about Unit 731 remained hidden behind official silence. In the late 1980s, Japanese journalists began to break that silence, uncovering fragments of evidence in government archives and survivor testimonies. Their reports forced open a door that had stayed shut for nearly half a century. Then, in 1993, the US government released a cache of classified documents under the Freedom of Information Act. Among them was a memo that justified the immunity deal. American officials said the data from Unit 731 were impossible to obtain in the USA because of scruples attached to human experimentation. The numbers that emerged from these files were staggering. Scholarly consensus now places the death toll at around 200,000 men, women, and children, killed in laboratories and open fields, and in the aftermath of biological attacks. Yet not a single perpetrator was ever prosecuted in the United States or Japan. No reparations were paid. The names of the victims, erased as Maruta, never appeared in court. The story was made public, but justice was left undone. Subscribe for more untold truths. Dehumanization was not incidental. It was policy, documented and traded for impossible data. American officials knew exactly what they bought and who paid the price. The scientists lived free. The victims stayed nameless. This was a deal, not an accident, and its stain endures. Subscribe for more untold history.